Hi, I'm Phil Kurz, contributing editor at TVTech Magazine and TVTech.com. I'm here today with Jared Schatz and Jen Jarvis from Ross Video for an executive Q&A about some of today's hottest trends in news technology. Jared is Ross Video's Senior Vice President, Vertical Markets and Solutions, and Jen is the company's product manager for editorial workflow. Jen and Jared, thanks for being here. Let's get started.
Thanks, Phil.
Uh,
Thanks.
J- Jen, story-centric workflows have been a buzz in TV news for several years now. What are the biggest hurdles broadcasters are facing with this transition from a workflow focused on a rundown in the newscast to one that encompasses social media, mobile, and the web?
I think it's a perfect example of something that really makes sense logically, but is really challenging to implement because it really encompasses two things that you need to be successful. One is having the right technology to support that workflow. So, a tool that allows to look at the content in a story centric way and easily repurpose content from platform to platform. And that's more than just being able to create content outside of the rundown. It's having the right visibility on content, where it's at in the content creation process, who's responsible for it. So it really actually kind of snowballs into a lot of planning tools as well. So there's the technology side of it, but then there's the culture side of it. And having that really cohesive plan that everyone is on board with and that we really focus our time and energy on implementing in the newsroom is also a big challenge. We all have to get our jobs done every day, and change can be very disruptive, even if it is creating a better workflow for us and allowing us to be more efficient and better for all of us in the long run. It's still disruptive when you're actually going in and trying to break some of those day-to-day habits that we have, change how conversations are happening and who's responsible for content. So those are kind of the two things that we still see broadcasters struggling with today. We've been talking about these story-centric workflows for a while, but in reality, it's not as simple as saying that you just want to implement them.
Right. From what I've seen, there seems to be two general approaches. One where newsrooms will have digital teams, and then there are other journalists who continue to produce for the on-air product. And then there are others that integrate the two together. And if I understand what you're saying, different stations are moving towards integrating, but it's a cultural thing and it's going to take some time. Am I reading too much into what you said?
I think either approach that you just mentioned is feasible and can be successful. They both come with different sets of challenges, though. If you are going to have kind of an all hands on deck approach, everyone's responsible for creating all the different kinds of content. There's a lot of education that needs to go into that. So far, a lot of newsrooms that have tried this approach, when they first begin, they sort of treat a lot of the digital and social media content as a checkbox on a to-do list. We have to do our TV story, and then we have to do our web story, and then we have to do our social media story. And even if they're pushing that earlier in the day, we're going to do a tease on social media. The nuance of the different audiences can sometimes be lost on some of the content creators. The type of people that you're connecting with on Facebook are different from the audience on Instagram or TikTok, for example, ages, income, interests. So we spend a lot of time in broadcast understanding our broadcast audience. We have that target viewer that we talk about, that age range. The consultants come in and educate us. We're not always spending as much time investing in understanding our digital audience. When you have a specialized digital team, they really deep dive into that and they have a really deep, nuanced understanding of that. But then the secondary challenge that you have, if you take the approach of having a separate digital team and a broadcast team, is managing the communication and the coordination between them. You want to make sure that you're not having redundant efforts across those teams, that you have visibility of content. You're creating a cohesive and consistent message across the types of content that you're creating. And a lot of times your broadcast team tends to primarily be out in the field, and your digital team may not be spending as much time out in the field. So having that collaboration together, having visibility of content, even if you have two separate teams working, if they're working in completely separate and distinct tools to build that content, you can have miscommunication, loss of information, and a lot of redundant efforts to build that content. So that it's kind of the opposite approach, where you have these very specialized knowledge sets, and they do have a deep understanding of their specific audience on the platforms that they're serving. But then you have to figure out how to get them all to work together. So I think both approaches can work, in my opinion, but it really comes down to, again, having the tool that allows them to all work together, education so that they understand the type of content they need to be creating, the strengths and weaknesses of the platforms that they're creating for, and the audience that's there. And then how do they actually collaborate and work together?
Jared, let me shift gears a little bit. ChatGPT has been making headlines for months. What's the proper role for AI in the newsroom?
In the newsroom would be more of Jen's background. In the control room, I could comment on that. Do we
Well,
want to talk?
Jen, you want to
Jen?
speak to the newsroom, and then we'll get to the control room. That's on my
All right,
list.
sounds good.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have those conversations because they're different. The way that we use AI and ChatGPT in the newsroom, I think, is newer in some ways. You know, we've been using AI in parts of our workflows for years and in our personal lives as well. So there's a certain comfort level with certain types of AI. And I find it's usually the AI where there's a finite answer. There's a right and wrong answer. Did AI successfully complete that task in the way that I expected it to be done? But now we're stepping into this world where it isn't black and white, and it's not just a yes or no, or did it complete the task? We're asking it to use editorial judgment, to write content, to be creative, to create. And that is much more abstract. And there is a lot of room for error, to be honest. So, you know, to me, I think there's a lot of ways that AI can assist even in the newsroom. It took me a little bit of time to wrap my brain around it. As a former journalist, you sort of want to step back and say, no, AI can't do my job. AI can't do what I do. And I still think that's true. But if you look at some of the more like tedious, repetitive tasks that we have to do even in the newsroom, could some of those be done by AI to free us up for more of the big picture editorial judgment calls, more research, more investigative work, more feature pieces? There's a lot of great things that we could be doing with that time instead. So I think what a lot of it comes down to, though, is that we sometimes get obsessed with buzzwords and with new technology that comes out. And instead of saying, how can I use AI? The question I more often like to ask is, what are the problems that you need to solve in your workflow? Because the answer could be AI, but the answer could also be another type of technology that could be assisting you, or a combination. So a lot of times I'll have people come up and say, how can I use AI in my workflow? Okay, let me show you some examples of how we're incorporating it into our newsroom product, and some time savers that I think it can introduce for your staff. But also, let's just talk about your workflow in general. Like, where are some of the places where your staff are wasting time, where they're inefficient, where they're frustrated, where you've been blocked from actually creating content? And let's look at solutions for that, because it absolutely could be AI, but it could also be some other kind of technology that we can use to help.
Okay, Jared, let's step out of the newsroom and into the production control room. What's the role for AI and machine learning in the actual production of the on-air product?
It's an interesting question. I mean, if you look at the production control room already as it stands today, at least in North America, they're traditionally automated. So you have what many would call an automated production control operator, which used to be primarily the TD. And so they're, in many cases, getting kind of down to that one person that can catch things. We did an experiment with voice recognition, actually, with Siri, and switching an entire show. One of our specialists did, and he was able to link things together, I think, like stream decks, and was controlling all Ross products with it. And his comments were, well, it's not going to catch a wild camera, right? If I call for camera 4 and it's shaking or pointing the wrong way, it's not going to cut music the same way someone would do on beat. It's very literal. And you would always need someone, at least in in a show that has advertisement and potential for make goods and things like that, you would need someone anyways. So the feedback was more on what can happen up front of that instead of the last part. And we're already doing it today. If you look at the Ross motion camera systems, we've implemented technology called Visionary, which is truly AI. They've invested a lot of money on that for primarily facial tracking at this point. And that's already on air at many stations. So things like that, assisting in spot checking your scripts to make sure that your show is coded properly. AI can certainly spot things like that. In sports, it has, I think, larger potential. We've already seen the possibility of AI selling graphics, right? It's based on an event that's happened, someone's been fouled, or someone hit a home run, or 2 grand slams in based on these large data sets. It's able to create lots of different graphic options that they can decide to take on air instead of relying on a human with keystrokes to call up complex data sets quickly. So certainly lots of potential there. We're already seeing it. Actually, the storage that we use, our storage provider we partner with, we've done some experiments with image recognition as well, with jersey numbers and replay systems that can cut video and recall assets based on jersey numbers that it sees in the video. Lots of potential there, but I think in the traditional news production control room, a lot of it would be up front of the final operator to make things more efficiently. Certainly cameras. I think audio is a big opportunity as well for implementing it into basically automatic audio controls and closing mics down when it senses there's a need to, and things like that. So certainly opportunity, and we're exploring it. But like I said, so far our judgment is that there still needs to be at least one human involved to ensure for a quality product.
Jared brought up the ability to recognize jersey numbers for as an example. I'm thinking in a news scenario that might be helpful as well, AI, in the sense of perhaps enriching metadata with facial recognition or speech to text and being able to search for footage more accurately. Are those sorts of tools being taken advantage of today in newsrooms?
Absolutely. So we've seen a huge investment in media asset management workflows in the last few years by a lot of broadcasters, realizing that they have a ton of untapped resources in their video archives, and really wanting to be able to take advantage of reusing it where it makes sense and where appropriate, and understanding these assets that they have access to. So as you mentioned, being able to harness that metadata is huge, but it's very time consuming to apply metadata to every asset coming into the newsroom and making decisions about what needs to be saved and making it easily searchable and discoverable in the future. So for those huge events, a lot of times newsrooms are investing effort into putting rich metadata. And there is metadata that we can pull from the newsroom system, from scripts to supplement that. But if we have like large chunks of raw video from meetings or from live events, there are lots of tools, and we have some built into our media asset management system, Streamline, to be able to do facial recognition, to do transcription on the video files. And that can be hugely beneficial. At this point, there is still cost associated with that you have to take into account. So it's not something that most newsrooms are going to be prepared to use on every piece of video that comes in or out of the newsroom, but they can be intentional. And like all technology, that price point is going to change over time and going to make it more feasible to use on a more daily basis or at a larger scale.
Okay, Jared, I took you from the production control room. Now we're going to go on to the set. Big video has been a growing trend at stations, either based, well, mostly a lot based on LED displays. So are you seeing a lot of stations adopting LED cubes on set these days?
Well, the cubes is basically just a a form factor
Right.
of design. And we are seeing a tremendous amount of LED being put in to set designs. In multifunction, there's LED for creative, where it's really part of the fabric of the set. Then there's the big video LED, taking the stand-up position wall, which historically only large markets could afford, or smaller markets had a series of LCDs, and expanding that. You're seeing some of these trends from Europe, actually, these big semicircle sets that's just full LED with very basic set design around them. And that really is kind of the big video look that you're describing, where you have this massive canvas that can look different for different shows, including fast channel production. Really resonates. It appears that it resonates with a younger audience, just that look, instead of the old-fashioned kind of anchor desk look that we all know well. But to segue into what you're touching on with really this immersive LED, that seems to be the latest trend. And if you look at a traditional studio, there's of course, a chroma key wall in almost all of them, and there's very few people that are comfortable in front of the chroma key wall. And of course, the Matt's the meteorologist, and there's an opportunity there. We have seen some LED displays replace chroma key walls, and I think we're going to see more of it. Now, that can be a 2D workflow, and just getting the camera out further, having a more dynamic presentation. But it can also be immersive with basically the camera and lens data tracked to very, very high quality render engines. We have our Voyager engine, which is based on the Epic Unreal Gaming engine. And that can be extended reality with extensions. So you can create the universe as large as you want. Otherwise, if the shot is framed down tighter, you don't actually need the extra complexity of the extensions. And that offers a tremendous opportunity. Go down the list. Anyone in the building can stand in front of it and be comfortable. They can turn around and interact with the content. So for breaking news, for specialty segments, for these new storytelling segments, we're seeing where the talent is kind of controlling their block, and they have social media, they have some different assets that they'll replay. That's a great environment. So I do think that's a big trend. The full LED first, and then secondary virtualized LED. Many would call it XR. XR is typically when you add the extensions to it and make the world even larger, but it can work with and without the XR extensions based on how large the wall is.
Well, and you said anyone feels comfortable inside the building standing in front of it. Now I'm going to ask you about anyone from outside the building standing in front of it. Is it realistic to think that a station, if they design their set properly, could market these walls for extended reality to applications, to producers who want to work that into their shows?
Well, studio space is in high demand across the country. But if you look at the traditional studio model, they're typically blank canvases, and production companies get brought in with gear, whether it be cinema cameras, certain lighting. So it's one of those things that, depending on how you design it, it may only cater to a certain audience. A good example would be TV stations that are doing commercial production for their own clients. So that's a no-brainer. And these LED environments would be fabulous for cranking out those commercials with great visuals and very high impact look. But taking it a step further, I think they would do it in their auxiliary or a secondary. Many TV stations still have a separate space for a second studio. And I think if they design those right, they could really do quite well with it. They would have to operate as a studio operator and have relationships with third parties that bring things in. There's historically typically set times and lots of prep. So I don't see that in the newsroom or in the main news studio as much. potentially their local commercial production could be done in their main news studio on schedule, but not large outside commercial production. So yeah, it's a massive opportunity, and I think if you look at the set design cycles, if we're going back to the primary studio, and everyone's ability or desire to be agile and flexible, whether it be for breaking news or to change looks or experiment for fast channel productions, this big video look really is just a palette that is not going to age the same way as your traditional hard set look.
Well, that's all the time we have, so we'll have to leave things there. I want to thank our Ross video executives, Jared Schatz and Jen Jarvis, for offering their perspectives. And I want to thank you for watching. For TVTech's Executive Q&A series, I'm Phil Kurz.